Welcome to the LECA Queen podcast. Today we're talking indoor plants and diving into semi-hydroponic growing. We'll cover media preparation, transitioning, and nutrients. Special guest Alison J joins us with her expertise. Let's jump in.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome back to the LECA Queen podcast. And I have Alison J back here today, and we have loads and loads of your questions to get through. So, how have you been, Alison?
Good, very good.
Fantastic. Are you ready for all the questions?
Of
And
course.
more questions? First section is about media preparation. So question number 1, is soaking LECA before using it for the first time necessary?
Is it necessary? No. Is it a good idea? I think so. I mean, I'm sure other people might disagree with me, but I think it's a good idea. A little bit of work I'm sorry, my cats are chasing each other. A little bit of work in the beginning, I think, is worth it for less work later. The idea of soaking is to better clean it, basically pull out the stuff that it gets deposited inside the pieces when it was manufactured. So, if you don't do it now, it's going to happen later over time. And that ends up being what we call the mineral deposits on top. It's one of the sources of mineral deposits. Obviously, there are other sources like your water type, how much of your nutrients you're using. If you're over fertilizing, you're going to get more, that kind of thing. But I didn't soak when I first started. So from personal experience, I can say it won't kill your plants. You can do it. It's fine. But I did find, anecdotally about an 80% drop in terms of how much mineral deposits I was seeing after I started soaking. So I've definitely continued doing it.
When you're saying mineral deposits, you're talking about the white stuff that accumulates on the top of your LECA, meaning that you have to flush. So you have to flush more regularly.
Yeah, that chalky stuff on top.
I agree with you 100%. I'm in the camp of washing. Again, like you, I think it's something that you only have to do that once, really. When you get that LECA straight out of the bag, it's the only time you have to do that. So just get heaps, wash heaps, and you're done. That's it. Never again.
I agree. It's not that much work either. I mean, I don't do the multiple soaks. I really only do one soak, and it'll be maybe for like a week because I usually just set it and forget it. So, put it in a bucket, throw some water in there. I also put in CalMag, so calcium, magnesium supplement in there. And it's not to have it soak up those nutrients. I think a lot of people mistake that, but rather to pull out. So the calcium actually it's like how a water softener works. It works by replacement. It's pulling out stuff and it just helps to speed up the process. So I'll throw a little bit of that in my bucket. I always use pure water or reverse osmosis for me. That's as pure as I'm going to get. Or you could use distilled too, or rainwater or whatever, because otherwise if you're using high mineral content water, you might be pulling out some stuff, but you're also depositing other stuff, and then you end up with the same problem essentially. So I don't see the point in using high mineral content water.
I think that's a really interesting point that you've put across. So because you're using the purest water that you can find, I think you can then not do as many soaks because you're starting with like the best base you can possibly start with. Whereas if you're using tap water with more mineral deposits, you probably may find that you might need to soak it more than once.
Possibly. I'm not sure. Like I've never done that test. But for me, my tap water is like 700 ppm, total dissolved solids. It's really, really high. So it would be not a good idea to use that for plants for any purpose in plant growing.
Yeah. I mean, whereas my water is 30 ppm, compared to your 700. It's 30 from the tap. So I think it's just understanding what water you're dealing with, what you're doing. Just give it a soak and it'll be fine. But just understand what you're doing and knowing that soaking is not soaking is not the end of the world, but it's a better deal for your plants, I think.
I think it's also important to explain the reason reasons. Like a lot of people think that we soak because it'll make it wick better, or you have to soak it in order to make it wick properly, or some people will soak it with nutrients thinking it's going to absorb those nutrients to then use for the plant later. Possibly, I'm not sure. I don't think of it as absorbing so much as just it's got pockets that sort of hold on to moisture, but I don't think of that as absorbing necessarily. So you might get minerals deposited in there. I don't know if it's necessarily a good idea to do that, maybe. But it definitely doesn't need the soak to wick. It'll wick regardless. Like I said, it's not necessary to soak. It's gonna wick either way. And we're not doing it also to make it not float. It doesn't really matter if it floats or not. I know there's a lot of Amazon reviews out there that say this is bad leca because it really
floats.
doesn't matter for our purposes.
Yeah, I was literally just researching floating leca the other day, actually, because I was like, okay, I really want to get to the bottom of this. And to be honest with you, I have not found a lot of information out there to
I think
actually.
people who are leaving those reviews are using it for a different purpose than we are, because we're not sticking it in water all the time, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly, we're not doing deep water culture, where they want that leca to. Yeah, it's completely different. And we now digress.
Yeah.
We completely digress. Now, how can I rinse new leca without clogging my drains?
I mean, it's best to do it outside, do it with a hose, or for me, I also have a utility sink in the basement that goes straight out to the sewer pipe. So I use that in the wintertime if I can't do it outside. I don't know if the dust will clog your pipes or not. That is sort of the rumor going around. Hey, don't do that because it'll clog your pipes. I don't know if that's true or not. I still will use leca, flush and whatnot, and dump at my sink, but I don't do the initial rinse there. I do the initial rinse either at the utility sink or outside with the hose. Of course, that is more complicated if you live in, third floor apartment and can't haul, you can't go outside, or you can't, you don't want to haul buckets up and down.
It is a bit more complicated. There've been a few suggestions. Go to the park, go the dog wash or the car wash or something, get a bucket, go hose out your leca there, or if you can clean it out in a bucket, and then maybe there's like pot plants in your apartment building somewhere and go and put it there.
Yeah, there's probably alternatives, but that would be my recommendation, just to be on the safe side. But once that you do that initial rinse, then yeah, you're going to get a little bit of dust, little by little over time, and if you're doing things at the sink. But I haven't found any problems that way. You don't want leca to go down your sink.
The dust that's created in the reservoir is so negligible compared to that first initial rinse.
Yeah.
So I put mine down the sink as well. As long as I've got that drain catch, so the actual leca doesn't go down the drain, then it's fine.
It's very important to have a good drain catch. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are all brands of leca created equal? Is there such a thing as bad leca?
Maybe. I haven't used all different brands. I know I don't like the brand that Home Depot sells, Hydro Crunch. It's cheap, but it also has like a slip coat or something on it that makes it so it doesn't quite wick as much. It will. I mean, it'll work, but it's just slightly on the drier side, which I'm not a huge fan of. So I mean, I bought it once, I used it, but I ended up just like mixing in other leca with it. So I did actually use it. I didn't get rid of it.
Yeah.
I won't buy it again though. So I mean, they're all a little bit different, but that doesn't. Most of the differences are negligible. And then there's the question of whether do you like the perfectly round shapes, or do you like the ones that are odd shaped? I think that's more of an aesthetic thing, honestly. I don't think there's really that big of a difference between them.
Shall we talk about Ceramsite? The cute mini balls, the mini leca. What do you hear on the streets? What are people who are using it saying on the web, in the chat rooms? What's your take?
Yeah, anything that says Ceramsite, I would avoid that. I've never tried it myself, but I have heard a lot of people say that it doesn't actually wick. From what I can tell, it looks like it is just clay balls and not expanded clay balls. Although Amazon does like to, sellers on Amazon, they'll throw everything in their title so that when you're searching something up, it pulls up their product. It usually it does say LECA in the title as well. But if it says Ceramsite, I would avoid it, just because supposedly from what people say, it doesn't wick. It doesn't look like it's expanded clay. That expanded part is important because that's what creates those pockets, the porousness that allows it to wick, right? If it's just clay, I mean, it's just like a rock, right? It's not going to wick that water through the pot. But there is such a thing as small leca. I have used small leca. You just have to be careful about which kind you buy. I've always gotten it from pet stores. Zoomed Hydro Balls, I think, is the brand I've used. It's just like regular leca, but it's small.
Did a little bit of reading about Ceramsite, and some of them are actually expanded, and they're made from so many different products, like sea waste, dredge, and all sorts of stuff. It's made of all sorts of stuff. So the problem is finding, and because it's made of so many things, some of it would actually be okay because it is expanded, but it's finding the one that is actually the right kind. But then again, it's also what kind of coating have they put on the outside. So they might have a glaze on the outside. And I guess that is also what contributes to it not being as wicking as LECA would normally be because they put stuff on
Maybe.
the outside.
That's interesting. I didn't delve that deep into it.
Yeah, no, I've been looking into it and I'm like, what exactly is this? I mean, it looks so pretty. You've got the pinks and the yellows, and there's lots of people on social media just like flooding the place with these lovely pink balls, and people are looking at them and they want to use them. And it's like, well, I don't
Yeah.
know. Do that at your own peril.
I mean, I have actually seen colored LECA where it was actually somebody had taken it and dyed it. It was only on one site and it was pretty expensive. So I don't offhand remember where I saw it, but it was actually legit LECA and it was colorful. So it's out
Yeah.
there. I don't know if it's worth the price though.
I guess if that's what you're looking for, just make sure you do your research. And if that's what you
Yeah.
really, really want, maybe just get a little bit, test it out. You never know.
Yeah, you can always do a wicking test where you just add water to the bottom or put the water in first, add the piece, the LECA, the ceramsite, whatever you want to call it, and then just see if it's pulling the moisture upwards or if it just stays, right? The line of the moisture. Does it stay down where you first added it, or does it actually sort of have that gradation of moisture, right? That would indicate that it's wicking, right?
How long can I leave LECA sitting in water without using it? So, you talked about your buckets. How long do you leave your LECA in your bucket?
I mean, it might be a week. It might be 2 weeks. I don't know how long the longest is that I've forgotten about it. I don't worry so much about it. Honestly, I am not sure. I don't leave it in there for much longer than a couple of weeks. I've heard of people wanting to store it in water. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I kind of feel like it probably doesn't matter. If you want to do that, then go for it. But I don't personally do that. I'll strain it when I remember it, a week or two later, and then just put it in my ready to go bucket, which, doesn't have a lid on it, and it'll air dry in the basement. And I don't put a lid on it because I don't want any mildew or mold growing.
I mean, I do the same. I have my LECA sitting in a bucket for a week, 2 weeks, probably at the most, and which is very rare because I'm always using my LECA. But yeah, I mean, I will have it sit there and just forget about it. But I think any longer than maybe 3 weeks, I probably wouldn't be happy doing that because I'm thinking it's sat in that stagnant water. Surely there's some bacteria starting to love it there. There must be something.
It is clean, right? And we're talking about new LECA, not used
Yeah, I
LECA.
know, but I mean, your bucket's not like sterile. The water's not sterile. Look, I'm just a germaphobe.
I do put a lid on it. Does that make a difference? I just don't want my cats getting in it with the water in there.
I don't know. I don't know if it makes a difference. Look, I think the only way to put this thing to rest is to maybe like do a proper experiment and get some agar or something and just do a swab and see what's growing. I don't know.
Well, maybe you don't want to know. Maybe it is better not to know.
But I think the take-home message, I think it's neither near nor there. I mean, a couple of weeks is fine. How do I clean dead roots out of my used LECA and sterilizing?
Yeah, a lot of people struggle with that. I don't have issues with it though. When I'm repotting a plant or unpotting a plant, a dead plant or something like that, I mean, I'm just straining it. So I put it in my strainer in my sink and I'm just running water over it and sort of moving it around. I'll pick out the big pieces, but I'm not going to like spend, hours picking out every piece of root. But mostly, like most of them fall through the strainer, right? Other than the big ones. Yeah. There might be a few pieces left when I throw it in to boil it, but at that point, I figure some stuff floats up to the top of the boil, and then I'm straining it again. So for the most part, I don't usually see much of anything extra in there when I go to actually use it again. And I figure at that point, if there is anything in there, it's probably sterilized. Pretty close there.
I like that. I like that thinking. And that's exactly what I do. I'm not completely anal about getting every last bit of root out of the LECA because I think you'd be there all day. But I have seen, I think it's the hydroponics guy on the internet do that thing where he dries off the LECA and he's got a fan and he's pouring it down and the fan is blowing and the roots are flying off.
I've seen that too. Cool looking, but boy, does that seem complicated to figure out how to do that and not have like LECA all over the place.
LECA all over the place and bits of roots flying into your mouth. I don't know. Sterilizing though, let's talk about sterilizing. What's your preferred method of sterilizing your LECA?
I just boil. I do probably 30 minutes boil. And that's it, really. And then I strain it off and call it good.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I don't complicate it at all. I don't even time my boiling actually. I boil my LECA for as long as, so I put it in my LECA boiling pot, in my LECA boiling stew pot.
I have a special pot for it too.
It has to be a special pot, guys. Just clarifying this.
To be fair, it doesn't have to be. I certainly.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true.
But then I was like, you know what? There's cheap used ones out there. I'll just get a special one. Then I don't have to clean it so much.
Yes, that is true. Thank you for clarifying that language. That is true. You don't have to, but it's probably best, and it'll probably make the rest of your family love you more if they know you're not using the pots for boiling your LECA. So they know that these are the special LECA pots. I mean, I got mine. Actually, my LECA pots, I was looking for some boxes. I was moving house. So I put out a call on Facebook, the neighborhood Facebook page. Does anyone have any moving boxes? And they're like, yeah, I got some boxes. And she's like, I got some old pots too. Do you want them? Like, yeah. And those are my LECA pots. I just got them for free, and I think I also I got another one from Kmart, really, really cheap. Because all you want it to do is just hold the stuff and hold the water, and I fill it up with my water. I put it on my stove, and invariably, I almost always forget that I've put the LECA on. And when I hear something popping, is when I think, what is that?
Because if it boils so much that all the water is gone, there might be an issue.
I know. I'm terrible. Well, I've only done that a couple of times, but I can be terrible that way. But you just boil it and your LECA's fine. A few people do use like bleach to clean their LECA.
I've heard of bleach, yeah. I use bleach to clean out pumice, because my pumice gets kind of nasty looking if I've been using it. If I do the Swedish plant guys approach, where you do the soil root ball with the pumice around it, or I'll do that sometimes with Pon. But the Pon doesn't get quite as dirty, because I think it's just more noticeable with pumice. But it gets kind of brownish. So I will stick that in some, 10% bleach solution, give or take, pour a little bit in there, call it good.
Yeah.
And then I'll just let it for maybe a week, and then then I put it, I'll rinse it a little bit, and then I'll just put it in my used pile. It'll get boiled from there, but that's my just way of cleaning it, not so much for sterilizing, although I'm sure it sterilizes it too. But there is there's quite a few videos out there by the Orchid Room. She uses a lot of different kinds of media for orchids, and she always uses bleach to clean her LECA each time. Now, she does a whole heck of a lot of rinsing afterwards, and I think that's the downside for me. I don't like working with bleach. It's risky for me because I'm terrible at wearing good clothes, or making sure I'm not dripping it and ruining my clothes in the process. Plus all that rinsing, just kind of like, no thank you. But you can certainly use bleach.
You can use bleach if you want.
Or you can bake it, but that seems like a lot of work too.
Is cleaning or reusing larger medium like LECA different from smaller media like Pon? I think you kind of addressed that one in a way, but do you want to talk to that directly?
Yeah, it's exactly the same for me. I treat them the same. I keep them separate in separate buckets, and but I clean them, and
So you get your Pon and you boil it.
When it's used, I'll boil it. Yes.
Is there a limit to how often you can use the LECA or Pon?
Not that I know of. Mine does not appear to be breaking down. I don't believe it ever does break down, so there shouldn't be any reason to ever need to stop. Unless you crush it on accident or something. But
let's go to transitioning at this point. Is there a certain level of plant loss that someone should expect when they're transitioning from soil to LECA or Pon?
I think so. I certainly lost, not in the very beginning, not a whole lot, but I think I felt like I got a little bit cocky at a certain point, and then I had a rash of ones that went bad. But honestly, looking back, I think it was more the plant types that I was dealing with, because maybe I just got lucky in the beginning. The ones that I was dealing with were easier. And then later on, I started dealing with some really finicky water lovers like waffle plant or petunias that just like,
Yeah,
they weren't happy. So yeah, I definitely have lost them. I think it's actually probably a good thing. I feel like there's a lot of paranoia about losing plants. And I think once
mm,
you have lost, it's falling off a bike, right? You need to feel that to sort of get over the fear of it. Like it's going to
yes,
happen. And here's what it feels like. And it's not as bad as you expect it to be. And you learn from it and you move on. I mean, I feel like it's part of the learning process. But certainly there are
it
people
is.
who maybe never lost a plant. I don't know. Not me. I
I
don't know.
have lost a lot of plants. And like you say, sometimes you can't understand what it is that you need to do for a specific plant until you go through that process of actually having unalived one. And then you're like, oh, okay, maybe for you, I'm going to have to do something different. I can't just do what I've
Just
been
try.
doing for everyone.
Yeah,
Mm,
exactly. And I think if you have that sense of just learning from experience, I think it can be a good thing. There are other people where it happens and whoop, giving up, can't do it, right? So you just have to have that desire to learn from it and see, okay, what can I try differently? Because something obviously went wrong.
yeah.
I think it can be a good
So
thing.
how can someone stop panicking? How can they like, okay, my plant's dead. Now what?
I mean, persistence for me, that's my approach, but certainly I don't know if everybody has that personality. For me, it's like,
Mm,
darn it, I will figure out what's wrong or what, even if it's a plant that I'm not particularly all that interested in, it's like a challenge I
yeah.
have to take on to figure it out. I don't know. I feel like there is a lot of helicopter plant parents out there that might actually cause the death of their plants by hovering
Hmm.
a little too much or tinkering a little
Sure.
too much or switching things up too quickly because oh no, maybe oh no, it's not getting enough moisture because the top is dry. Well, the top is supposed to be
Yes.
dry. I mean, it's normal, right? There's that
Yeah.
gradation. So they're top watering too often and then they end up killing the plant. So there's a certain level of just backing off instead of hovering too. And I mean, you want to learn and watch and observe, but also if you're going to be a helicopter plant parent, it's not necessarily a good
Yeah,
thing.
it's not gonna work. Yeah, that's true. That's true. The plant needs its space. Should I avoid transitioning a plant from soil to leca when it's cold out?
Always do. I never really stop. If I get a plant in the dead of winter, I can't trust myself with soil plants, so it's going straight into the semi-hydro and
Mm,
sink or
mm,
swim. But most of the time, it swims. To be fair, like I've killed a fair number of plants, but it has gotten easier with time, right? It does.
mm.
Once you kind of get into the groove of things, it does get easier, and you just kind of figure it out. So yeah, with the wintertime thing, I just kind of know how things go, right? And the plants don't seem to react any differently if it's in the middle of winter. And I've gotten plants where it's, below freezing outside, bring them in, they're still a little cold from the shipping, and they do fine. So,
But definitely, there's no blanket rule that says you cannot transition your plants in the wintertime. So it's just about understanding your
yeah.
conditions, understanding what the plant needs, and go for it.
And some people like
Cool.
to acclimate their plants too to their home environment before they
Mm,
transition. I'm not one of those people, but there are certainly people who feel like they need to do that. I've never found that necessary, nor could I keep up with that just because I don't trust to keep it in soil any longer than
yeah.
it has to. Otherwise,
Exactly.
forget
Yeah,
it.
I'm exactly the same. There's no acclimating. It's just the second you hit my house, you're either staying in the garage because I'm not ready for you yet, and 2 days later you're straight into the leca, or you from the store you're straight into the leca because there's no point. I've got my philodendron spiritus sancti that that is still living in soil at the moment.
Mm, yeah, see, that's more risky to me than moving it
And
over.
that's yeah, I mean it was so tiny. It was a tissue culture plant. It was so tiny. And when I got it, it was like one of the leaves was like broken and it was just, the little roots were just and I was like, "Oh no, I don't want to touch these."
Well, and I mean, I root in sphagnum moss. So if I get a plant that doesn't have a healthy root system, I will put it in spag and I will put it in my prop bin and put a plastic bag over it. And that
Yeah.
is like, for me, a pretty guaranteed way of protecting the rest of the
Mm,
foliage until the root system gets, healthy enough to then move to semi-hydro.
So you recommend I whack it in some spag and just baby it for a little bit.
Well, how are the roots doing? Have you looked at them recently? Like, how long have you had
Well, it's looking good. It's given me 2 more leaves since I got it, so I think she's definitely getting there, and they're sizing up. I'm looking every time I look at it, I think, you're ready. You're ready. You're ready.
I mean, look, humidity is your best friend. I wish I had
Yeah.
known that. Like, if we're talking about the things I wish I had known when I got started, I wish, and I probably did know. Somebody probably said it, and I just probably, yeah, whatever. Humidity is awesome. Like, you can't go wrong with humidity. So, and not even just a cabinet humidity, not even just sitting next to a humidifier. There's not enough. Like, we're talking 100+% humidity is just, it will ease any stress that the plant has because that foliage will be protected. It doesn't need to struggle to support the foliage. If the roots struggle to adapt, it'll push new roots while you protect that foliage with 100+% humidity. So I would do that with yours. I'd be putting it in a prop bin after moving it over and just giving it time.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, it's actually living in a glass dome. I've got a glass dome over it, which it's been under. So it was like maximum humidity, lots of light as well. So I think she's right. Should I transition from soil to semi-hydro differently when I'm transitioning from water to semi-hydro? So if someone's transitioning from soil to semi-hydro and from water to semi-hydro, are they doing things differently?
It's possible, yeah. So I don't really do water propping. Now, I mean, there's a difference between cuttings that you're rooting in water versus like what you do, your long method, where you're putting, with the soil roots in water to grow new roots. I mean, I think the end result is the same because you've got new roots, right?
Yeah.
Still slightly, yeah. So I don't really do that anymore. There was a period where I was water propping, cuttings and whatnot with, an air stone and whatnot. It works really well. It just doesn't work with all plants, and it's not as reliable in my mind, or at least in my experience, as moss is. So I kind of moved my water propping bin over to be now my hydroponic lettuce growing station. That's not necessarily going all that well, but I'm learning. So I don't really water prop anymore, but I do think the roots that come from that do tend to do better, in my experience, going to Pon instead of LECA, but not across the board. So depending on the plant, it always depends on the plant. In some cases, you might want to go with a higher reservoir just to sort of ease the plant into less water, because, if you go straight to a 1/3 reservoir or a wick setup after having water propped it, you might shock it because it's going to be quite a bit less water. But some other plants might do fine. So like monsteras would do fine. I mean, they're going to be perfectly fine having less moisture, in my experience. I think you're actually on the safer end if you go with less moisture. So I did a moss rooting of is it Adansonii? Am I saying that right?
Adansonii. Yeah, that one.
That one that I then went to straight away to LECA. I don't usually do that. I'll usually go to Pon if I've rooted it like that. But I that one to LECA, and it's done fine since. I didn't even do a higher reservoir with that one. So it depends on the plant. It depends on the the media you have at your hand. It's not necessarily a conclusive answer.
No, well, it's not, and it can't be, because I think you just have to try it. You just have to try and see what works for your plant, what works best for your environment, and for whatever medium you're using.
I mean, trial and error is really, you have to do it. There's really no way around that. I know that you want to get it right with every plant because you don't want to have it go wrong. But honestly, I think you learn the most from those that do decline or die. I mean, hopefully, at a certain point, they just decline and then you rehab them.
You can save it.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I am now. It's not that I don't have plants do poorly once in a while. I just know how to rehab better. And that's what I've learned in this process, is how to properly rehab a plant, which I think is super valuable. And you really can't get that information without trial and error.
Exactly. That is so true. Do I need to remove all the soil or the sphagnum moss from the roots when I'm moving my plant from soil or moss to LECA? Will it cause root rot if I don't?
It's not been my experience. I know there's the, general consensus, I guess, out there that says you have to remove it all. You have to get every speck off. Or
which you can't, by the way.
No, and I don't even think, I mean, why I would rather err on the side of not stressing out the roots, quite frankly. Yes, get as much as you can off. Will it cause rot? Probably not. I mean, it's not been my experience. I know when
Yeah.
my first batch of transitions, I did a really bad job of cleaning them off. And I think maybe a month or two later, I was like, I probably should go back. And so I did end up pulling most of those up and cleaning them again, but they weren't rotting. I mean, it was
Yeah.
fine. They were fine, but I did anyway, just because that was the thing to do. That's what everybody said you should do.
Was said
So
you should do. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So
Mm,
I
mm.
did my best to do that. But no, that's not been my experience. I mean, I move a lot of plants over with the soil root ball still in place, and I think that shocks some people because oh my gosh, how does it not rot? It doesn't. It just doesn't. The
Yeah.
roots do fine. They grow out into the pumice or the leca or the pon, whatever you're using as the outer medium, and they have their air, their oxygen there, and it's fine. I had a plant once that I had potted soil root ball. It was oh my gosh, I'm gonna hack it. It's a Scindapsus. Am I saying that?
Yes. Oh, you got it. That's the one.
Satin pothos. So I potted it soil root ball with pumice around it, and at some point I was pulling the pot down because it was hanging, right? Pulling it down and I dropped it. I was like, all right, well, I'm just gonna, scoop it all up, put it back and hang it back up. I didn't clean it off. The soil was kind of all over the place in the pumice. It had just kind of scattered. There wasn't like that compact root ball anymore like there used to be. At some point, I did repot that plant. I think I just unpotted it just to make sure. And the roots were fine. Like, I think it was maybe a year later. There was no rot. It was like soil was mixed in with the pumice and it was fine.
Do you think perhaps that we think that plants are such fragile things that they cannot adapt to any simple thing that we do, any change we make? We're just so scared that the plant's just going to freak out and die when they've been living outside for centuries with everything that nature throws at them.
They're very resilient. I have had plants survive some pretty, surprising situations, come back from pretty much nothing. And they want to survive, that's for sure. Now, to be fair, sometimes they do just die because of something and maybe you don't always know why, but they are pretty resilient. So I would not,
Are some plants easier to transition than others? What would you recommend that a newbie start with?
I think that's a matter of opinion. If you look around and ask people, how did it go with XYZ plants? And you're going to get all the possible answers. It's some people say it's the easiest plant ever. Other people say, oh my God, I can't keep one alive in it. So I just think it's a matter of everybody has a different experience. As far as easy ones for me, I think Hoyas are super, super easy. Syngoniums.
Yep. Oh yeah. Syngoniums love everything. I think Hoyas, Syngoniums. What else have I found? Spider plants. I found spider plants.
Alocasia. Oh yeah. Well, I've heard of people having problems with spider plants. I was like, what? How do you have problems with spider plants? They're so easy. But no, I would say alocasias.
So happy.
But you had problems with alocasias, right?
Yeah. I have a love-hate relationship with alocasias. We'll leave it there, Alison. I have a lot of alocasias that have gone dormant over winter. I have 2 other alocasias that are thriving like no man's business. And there's just no understanding. Well, to be fair, my house is pretty cold at the moment, so I can't really blame them. My advice would be probably use a plant that you're least attached to.
Yes, I agree.
and give it a go because it's in the trying, because we all have different experiences. Just grab a plant that's easily replaceable, have a play with that and see how you go.
Then don't get discouraged if it doesn't go well the first time. I mean, it's unfortunate when people do because, keep trying. But do something different next time. Who knows,
Does size or maturity of the plant make a difference in terms of transition success or failure? Baby plants, big plants, medium-sized plants? What do you hear?
I don't have very many really mature plants that I've ever transitioned. You may have had more experience with those just because I'm not allowed to have big plants, generally speaking. I can't have any floor plants at home because I got cats and kids and not enough space for them. Yeah, so I mean, my experience, I haven't transitioned a whole lot of like really big plants. but I've certainly seen enough people who have had success doing it, so I know it's possible. Maybe you have more experience with the really big ones.
Yeah, no, I do love transitioning a big plant. It's one of my specialities. I love it. And yeah, it is possible. It's definitely not something I would recommend a newbie to do. It's something that
Got it.
needs a little bit more persistence, something that needs a lot more confidence. So knowing, being confident in what you're doing and being able to wait and knowing when to intervene and what to do when the plant is looking slightly unhappy.
Yeah, that's true of any transition, honestly, and that's something you're going to
Mm.
learn with time. So
But I guess with bigger plants, obviously, if you're buying a bigger plant, it probably costs more. You probably bought it because you love the way it looks. So I think people tend to have a greater attachment to a bigger plant, or maybe you've had it for a much longer time. Or sometimes people will come to me and say, "Oh, I've got my Pothos or my Hoya I got from my grandma's funeral. I want to transition it to LECA. Should I?" And I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know. It depends, as long as you go into it understanding the risk.
Well, and then there's also the insurance factor. You can take insurance by grabbing some
Yes.
cuttings. I mean, Hoyas are easy to grab cuttings from. I mean, there are other plants that aren't quite as easy to do that with, but there are pothos are super easy to do that with, right? And pothos are all over
Yeah.
the board. That is not one I would recommend anybody start with because some of them are really super easy and it's going to be a different one for every single person. And then other ones will just like never want to take. Although, I mean, for me, that was the Mandula, which is why it pisses me off so much that my cat ripped off the strand today from. Anyway, it didn't pull the
so
poop over, it just
sorry.
pulled off the long strand. So the plant's fine. I just have now a whole bunch of cuttings I have to root because, I can't
Yeah.
let that go to waste. It took me a long time to get that one to take. I could not get it straight from soil to, I tried twice. I've had bought two of them. And
Wow.
it ended up being cuttings that I ended up having. I tried so many different ways to root it because back then I didn't know what I was doing as far as rooting. So the poor things went through like all the different possible rooting scenarios to finally get them to take. And after it took, it did great. So when you say attachment, I also think people get a little too attached to a particular leaf or set of leaves. Like plants are going to change, they're going to grow,
That's
they're
true.
going to evolve. I mean, I think of it as a long game, right? I want this plant to survive. Do I really need that particular leaf to survive? Probably not. I just want it to survive because eventually it's
Mm.
going to grow into a beautiful plant. It might look a little bit different, but it's going to
Mm.
grow. So as long as I can get it to take, then it's just a matter of
Yeah,
time before it gets bigger. So yeah, I mean, I have
that's
big
true.
plants now. I didn't necessarily start with a whole bunch of big plants though. I will say I do transition a lot of babies too, but I'll also root them well in moss first before I move them over. And then I'm going to baby them with a heck of a lot of humidity, right? Before I actually
Mhm.
will,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of plant they are, because most of the plants that I'm
Yes.
doing that with are terrarium plants anyway, so they're going to stay in high humidity. But even higher, I'll baby them with the really, really high
Yeah.
before I move them down to like cabinet humidity. So they might be really
Yeah.
small to start, though. I've definitely dealt with a lot of really small ones.
Are transitions different when you're going to Pon or LECA? Do you treat your transitions differently?
No, not really. It's pretty much the same, except, I mean, I just pick and choose which one I'm using depending on the plant, but otherwise the process itself is the same.
Can all plants be transitioned the same way?
No, I don't think so. Absolutely not. No.
What would you do differently for what plant?
Well, the big one is like shower method, and I don't know why we call it shower method. It's a little silly, and I know there's always the confusion of do you actually stick it in the shower and run what? No, I don't, because my shower water is not going to be good for plants, so I do not do that.
Yeah.
But basically, shower method just means running your nutrient solution or plain water, but for me, it's always nutrient solution through the pot, wetting the media, but then not letting it collect in a reservoir. So you're letting it drain out, dumping the reservoir or whatever. And then I like to do it on a schedule. I'm not one of those people who's going to go back to that soil growing guesswork of when to water. I'm just doing it on a schedule. So it'll be like once a week for drier loving plants. So like monsteras, aglionemas, my aloe plant demanded that approach because we struggled back and forth with what it Yeah, it did not like a reservoir from the start. It turned all
Did
purple
it turn
on
into
me, and I was
mush?
like, no, it turned purple. It was healthy. It was just purple.
Ah,
And I was like, huh, what's going on here? And it did not
okay.
like too much moisture. I tried different things with it, but it was taking away the reservoir and switching it to once a week shower watering it, that it went green. It really quickly went back to green and was perfectly healthy. So it didn't like all that moisture right from the start. It has a reservoir now, but
Yeah.
it didn't like the reservoir at first. It needed to grow those roots first before it could tolerate the reservoir. So yeah, and that's,
Cool.
I mean, for like monsteras, since they are more dryer loving and they are, more prone to rotting if you have too much moisture, having that shower method to me is like a safe approach, really. I mean, it's a safer
Yeah.
way to go. Make sure you don't have that problem. And I know a lot of people, and I've gone back and forth with people on it, like, how do you let it dry out so much? How does it not, dry rot or something? It doesn't, because they're fine. They actually kind of like that a little bit, right? For me, a week is a good schedule for LECA. I don't know about Pon because I've never put a Monstera in Pon, so I don't know if, they need longer in between or not, because Pon holds more moisture.
Yeah.
But for me, a good schedule is just once a week for those. And then after a couple months, once you start seeing those new offshoot roots, then, it's safe to add a reservoir because it can
The
tolerate it,
reservoir.
but it's
Yeah.
just in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Okay. So it's
there are people who will like put the reservoir from the start and then expect to lose the soil roots, right?
yeah.
And expect that new roots will grow. It's kind of like the long approach where you stick it in
Yeah.
water and those soil roots are going to rot off.
Yeah.
I honestly would prefer to keep the original roots as much as possible. It might not be possible with all plants, but for the most part, I can keep those roots. Like with monsteras, I don't lose those soil roots if I'm doing shower method. I'm keeping it on the
Yeah.
drier side. I'm easing it in
Yeah.
to
So they're
adapting.
able to, the plant's able to adapt. So those soil roots get the water roots towards the end and everybody's just happy.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of was my experience with aglionemas to the Chinese evergreens as well. So they didn't
Yeah.
like straight to the wick setups. They needed the shower watering to get, I mean, just to more successfully transition, at least from
Yeah.
my experience. So I mean, that's a very particular approach for very particular plants. I know people have tried like shower method for other plant types, and they might vary the amount and frequency of how often they're watering it. So I've heard of people doing like water lovers, calatheas, like every other day shower watering. That to me just seems like a lot of work. I would rather just add a reservoir, quite frankly. But you could do that. It's just a matter of trial and error and figuring out how often you have to water it. I reserve
Yeah.
that approach just for the drier loving plants, though.
No, I couldn't do shower method every 2 days. No.
No, that's too much work for me.
I couldn't do that.
I mean, are there any plants that you just chop? I know you used to not feel comfortable chopping the soil roots off and starting over, right? Do you do that now, or is that still your stance of not doing that?
I mean, I'm happy to do that with my Hoyas. I'm happy to do that with my philodendrons. They're quite happy to take the hit and start again. I haven't transitioned any plants like that recently, and I think I'm just really comfortable with I mean, especially with Hoyas. I think for me, my go-to method for transitioning Hoyas is just clean off the roots as much as I can, whack them in the leca, put a reservoir, and away I go. That works really well for me. And even taking off the roots, I think is just one step too far. It's an unnecessary step, I find. I've done it to show that it's possible, it can work, but I don't use it. That's like 5 minutes that I'd be using to clip off roots. That would be fine anyway.
Yeah, I don't tend to clip or even shorten any roots, really. I'll just clean them off and throw them in. Hoyas will tolerate it fine. I mean, I have done it with Hoyas as well, and I know it works. And then peperomias I've done as well, just because I had an issue of root rot in the beginning for me with my first one.
Yeah.
The root rot, it wasn't the root rot that was the problem. It was the fact that it spread into stem rot, and then I had a serious rehab situation going on with my first one. So with those ones, like I'll just either chop the roots out from the start and just re-root from the start, or just make sure I pull it up, which I don't recommend people normally do, pull up plants periodically to clean them. I don't recommend doing that, except peperomia. That was when I've transitioned other ones after that first one, I've done that with them just to make sure it doesn't become stem rot. But that's an isolated plant type that I wouldn't normally do that for, or don't need to do that for with other plants.
Are dry media transitions better than wet ones? Dry media. So your LECA is completely dry.
I mean, so to be clear, my LECA is usually dry when I go to use it. It's easier to use dry media in my experience because otherwise the scoop, everything sticks to the scoop, especially in the case of Pon pieces. Maybe not so much LECA, but certainly Pon. So my media is usually dry because my buckets have been sitting out air drying, but I don't leave it dry. Like, it's not what I would consider a dry transfer. I will pot the plant up and then immediately top water to wet that media, because dry, especially dry LECA is actually a very harsh root environment. I don't think I would subject my plants to that for very long. I would definitely wet it right away. I've heard of people doing dry transfers. I don't personally think it's a good idea. Yeah. I'm not.
So what do they do when they actually do a dry transfer? Is there just a reservoir at the bottom and the LECA is left completely dry, or what do they do?
No, if you watch that one lady's video about how to do it, she was specifically doing Hoyas. So maybe it's particular to Hoyas, but her approach was, and I think this is the one that people still dig up her videos, even though she doesn't actually plant Hoyas in LECA anymore, but they still find that video.
Yeah.
But she would air dry the roots of the plant. So let the roots of the plants dry. I don't want to do that. That's just scary. And have completely dry LECA, pot them up, and then wait for the plant to start looking wrinkly. Once it starts looking wrinkly, then she would water it. No, thank you. That seems like that might work for some plants, like Hoyas that are drier loving, but I definitely don't do that with water lovers, because I think you would very quickly have a dead plant.
You would very quickly have a dead plant, but it just seems like unnecessary torture.
It does feel like that. Yeah, I don't want to wait until my plant
why does the plant
struggling.
need to actually exhibit distress before you give it what you know it actually needs? I don't understand that. I don't. Let's talk about nutrients, people's favorite subject. What's the best fertilizer that you have available in the US?
Yeah. See, there's a lot of good options. I don't necessarily think there's a best. I think there's definitely certain things you need to look for. You need a complete array of nutrients. So the best thing to go with is going to be hydroponic fertilizer. Now, it's not that you can't use soil fertilizer. I know there's a lot of people out there that say, you just can't use it. You can't use it. You can technically, but there's two problems with that. One, you have to figure out the right dilution, because if you use the soil recommended dilution, chances are you're probably going to burn your roots or burn your foliage or something. It's probably going to be too much. Then two, most soil fertilizers are only strictly, macronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. And they can get away with that. That's fine in soil because the soil itself has some nutrients in it that the plant is getting. So you're just kind of supplementing with your fertilizer. But with semi-hydro, we have zero nutrients in our media. So we have to provide everything they need. So you need all of those micro and macronutrients. And so you do need something that has a complete array. Now, not every product has the same percentage of the various nutrients in it. So, I mean, you have to kind of, it's a little bit of trial and error. I mean, there are some products that are better than others, but definitely a lot of good options out there. I like Dynagrow Foliage Pro. I think it's cheap in the US and it's good. It'll work across all your plants. I mean, you don't have to necessarily use different fertilizers for different plants. And it's easy because it's a single bottle, right? Like Foliage Focus is a single bottle, right? And that's ideal. Now, that doesn't mean the 2-bottle or 3-bottle options aren't good. Those are good too. They tend to be marketed more towards like production crops, like cannabis or veggies or whatever, hydroponic crop growing kind of thing. It gives the grower flexibility to have 3 bottles because you get to vary your NPK or your various percentages of nutrients depending on how much of each bottle you add. but we're
Yeah.
growing so many different kinds of houseplants. We're not growing a single kind of houseplant. So yeah, I'm certainly not going to vary the makeup of my fertilizer to
Mm-mm.
suit, certain plant types. Cause quite frankly, that's just too much. So I think
Yeah.
Foliage Pro is a good option for a lot of different plants. It's not necessarily the only option out there, but I think it's a simple, cheap, and effective option in the US. I know Foliage Focus is not very available and very expensive in the US.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I know a lot of people have gone looking for it, but it is pretty pricey here still.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, it does have to ship in from Australia. So, by the
yeah,
time it ships in, by the time you've got customs and whoever taking their cut, it does end up being,
yeah,
a bit on the pricier end. But I think I like what you've said. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's finding out what's readily available for you, what you can afford to use, what's you find easiest for you to use. And there is no best. It's
I
just,
see. Like, I think a lot of people think that, hey, if I use that fertilizer that that person is using, I'm going to get the exact same results as that person. And that's just not true, because
yeah.
fertilizer is only one aspect in the care of your plant. And I think we
Hmm.
forget about all the other factors that, even my biggest foe is light. Like, figuring out the right amount of light for different plants I've stumbled over that so many times with so many different
Yeah.
plants, and they all kind of give different signals and different signs. And I, mistaken it for pests, or mistaken it for something else, or,
Yeah.
not enough fertilizer, too much fertilizer. But really, it's just light. Like,
It's just like,
everybody
exactly.
there's different environmental conditions, and you have to figure out what different plants need. And it's not, that fertilizer product that you paid way too much for is not going to solve all those other problems. It is just one piece of the puzzle. So find a
It
good one
is.
that
It
has a good
is.
array, and then just, you got to figure out the rest of the puzzle pieces
Stick to
too.
that. I
So
mean, what do you think of this? I always kind of recommend to people that, look, if you're absolutely stumped, you don't know what you're doing, go to a local hydroponics shop, talk to the
mm,
guys there, and see what they're carrying, see what they would recommend, and kind of make your decision based on what you have available there. And they'll show you the essential, the guaranteed analysis, and you can sort of figure out. So it might not even be a product that lots of people are talking about on the internet, but it might still be suitable for your plants.
I agree. I don't have any hydroponic stores near me that are still open. They've all closed. So I don't get to do that. But yes, a lot of people do have that option. I think that's a good one, because then you're going to get the more affordable options, quite frankly. And now I will say, a
Mm.
lot of the hydroponic store workers here, from what I've heard from other people, aren't always very knowledgeable about semi-hydro growing. They might actually discourage it.
Yeah,
So, because their knowledge base is hydroponics, and keeping in
yeah,
mind that the fertilizers that are, for hydroponics are good for us to use, yes, but we're not using them in quite the same way
the
as
same
is
way.
recommended on the box. So no matter what product you use, you're gonna have to figure out the correct dilution and how to use it, which is not something you're gonna sidestep by just finding the right product, right? Because you got to do
Mm.
that with any product, and not every
Yeah.
plant needs the same amount. So I'm not that person, and I'm not on board with feeding my plants exact same amount
Mm.
across the board. It sure would be nice if I could do that, but that's not been my experience, because some plants will then show signs of too much fertilizers, other plants will show signs of deficiency. So I've kind of had to learn to vary the concentration based on the plant needs, basically.
Should I continue to fertilize in the winter?
Yes, I do. I might decrease the concentration, though, just because I can tell. My plants tell me, and actually we're getting into, it's late summer here and not quite early fall, but we're getting close to it. And
Yeah.
my plants tend to show me that the weather is cooling down before I even realize it. I'll
Mm.
see more mineral deposits on
More
top,
mineral
which means I need
deposits.
to back off. I've
Yeah.
just noticed that. And yeah. So I don't
Yeah.
know, but that also depends on, have you soaked your media so you don't have mineral deposits because of that, and are you using good water? So if your
Yeah.
water has a lot of minerals in it, you're going to get mineral deposits regardless.
That is absolutely true. But more importantly, when you're growing your plants in semi-hydro, you're pretty much almost always fertilizing, because that's a question I get a lot. Like, do you have to have nutrient solution in the reservoir all the time, or do you just use plain water? What's your take on that?
Continuously feeding is definitely the best way to go, just to make sure you're actually feeding enough. Again, though, you need to make sure you're using good concentrations or dilutions of
Yeah.
that fertilizer to suit the plant's needs. But you don't, so I mean, there are some people who like fertilize once a month. The problem with that is that you have to actually feed at a higher concentration for it to get enough. And then you're kind of throwing that higher concentration at them all at once. And you do risk, fertilizer burn. You get burns on the leaves or browning edges or something like that.
Yeah.
That it's just not worth it. Using a lower concentration and feeding continuously, the whole weekly thing, is better for semi-hydro growing. I mean, it's certainly a gentler approach, I think. I wouldn't do more than once a month of a plain water break. If you're going to do a plain water break, I wouldn't do more than once a month.
Now let's talk about Superthrive. Can you use Superthrive with semi-hydro plants?
And I'll clarify Superthrive, since Superthrive is now the name brand of Dynagrow Foliage Pro, which is super confusing and not a huge fan of that myself.
That.
But Superthrive that we tend to call Superthrive is the vitamin formula or whatever they call it. It's just a rooting hormone. So yeah, you can use it. It's going to help your roots, but definitely don't use it more than once a month, but don't leave it in your reservoirs more than a week if it's an established plant. I mean, it's more for like new transitions or cuttings that don't have roots. It's just a rooting hormone. You got to be careful how you use them, though. You don't want to use them continuously long term, or you might have problems like stunted growth, small leaves, that kind of stuff. But personally, I'm not a big fan of Superthrive. It has there's some ingredients in it that are questionable. I mean, I haven't done a deep dive on the research on that, but I know within like the cannabis forums, you'll see that they all find it to be a joke. They would never use it on their plants, kind of thing. Why is that still around, sort of thing? There are better options out there. I personally, Rapid Start is a good product, and I like to use just plain kelp as a root hormone, basically.
pH question. The pH of my reservoir seems to change over time. How do I keep it stable for optimum nutrient absorption? I know you love this one.
I don't even want to delve into this one again. It's there's no simple answer to this, but I will say my procedure is, because pH, we don't know how important pH is in semi-hydro setups. There's obviously not going to be any research on semi-hydro setups. I'm going to say that again. Semi-hydro setups, not necessarily hydro setups, which is a little bit different than semi-hydro. So we don't necessarily know how important it is. But I will say from experience, because without knowing whether it's important, I still make sure that my pH falls within a sort of acceptable range. Usually for me, that's like 5.5 to 6.5 when I'm mixing up my solution. But once I pour it into my reservoir, I do not touch it. I do not check it. I do not care.
Like all bets are off at that point.
And that's the thing. Like, there are the people who are hardcore it matters type of people. I mean, maybe people coming from hydro where it is very, very important. But you'll also find a huge number of people in the semi-hydro arena that do not care, do not check, never have, and don't have any problems. So it's like, well, how can that be? Like, if it's so important, how are there so many people who never even pay attention to it? So I'm kind of the mind that it doesn't matter all that much. I don't have the scientific research to back that up. I've done my own, sort of experiments that are very pseudo scientific. I wish I could say I had any, a conclusive, result from them, but no, I do not. So I do pay attention. Well, I only remotely pay attention to it when I'm, mixing my nutrient solution, because I don't check it anymore. I just know that it falls within that range based on the, amounts of whatever I'm using in the water. Well, I was going to say, once it's in the reservoir, though, don't go down that rabbit hole, because that you will give up semi-hydro growing if you check your reservoirs and you try to keep it stable. It's just not possible, and it doesn't matter. I've had my reservoirs go down to 3.5 and I freaked out, and I was like, oh my gosh, how do I fix this problem? But then at a certain point, I stopped and I looked at the plant and I said, it doesn't care. So why should I? And I just stopped checking. So anyway, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I was saying that I was talking to Kevin from Hakuna La Planta, and he was a checker, or I think he is. I don't know. I can't remember now. And I was like, why? Why would you do that? Because obviously I'm not a checker. when I'm mixing my nutrient like you, I make sure it's within the range. So when it's going in, it's good. After that, I like I'm like, okay, so practically, I said to him, practically, what are you doing? Have you got your little pH meter and going into your reservoir and going, oh, it's 3.5,
You're
and then what
stressing
are you
yourself
doing? And then what do? You get a drop of pH up or pH down, put it in there and mix. What do you do?
they their reservoirs and they put new ones in there. So how often are you doing that?
No, that's just not sustainable in any way. I don't do that because I just thought there's just no way I could sustain it.
Yeah. No, and I've seen, so there's a YouTube video out there by a self-proclaimed soil scientist who she did this whole thing where like, I know the reservoir pH is off because I can see it in the foliage. You see these, they're starting to yellow a little bit. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. So I mean, if you really think about it, like, okay, if pH is about nutrient absorption, so then we're talking about nutrient deficiencies would be the sign that there's a problem
Yes.
with the pH.
Yes.
Well, look, we're not growing plants hydroponically. If you're growing hydroponically, you see those shifts faster in terms of like you'll see your deficiencies, or you'll see the too much, the burns from too much fertilizer. I'm certainly fighting with that with my hydroponic setup right now. But with semi-hydro and houseplants, you do not see those kinds of swings of deficiencies that quickly. It can take 6 months to a year to really see deficiencies because you're feeding a little bit, it's getting something, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it's getting nothing at all. I mean, when I gave my basil 0 nutrients, within a couple weeks it was looking kind of sad, but that was 0 nutrients, and that's not what we're doing with most of our plants. So it's going to take a lot longer to see those deficiencies. You're not going to see it in a week like this person was arguing. So
I think, like you said, the most important thing that you said is the research is just not there for semi-hydro. So we just don't actually know. We're all kind of going anecdotally based on what we see in our practice, and our practice is such that it's not important to check once you've got the pH down the first time you put it in there, the plant knows what it does.
And I don't even know how important it is in hydro growing either, because I certainly follow groups that do hydro growing or aero garden, hydro growing, and they don't, a lot of them don't check pH either. And, they have these beautifully large heads of lettuce and vegetables growing. And so I honestly don't even know how important it is in those settings. Maybe in a huge production crop setup, it's ideal. I mean, keeping in mind too, that to really know if a plant is deficient, like you have to do a nutrient analysis. And I don't have that capability of actually taking these leaves and analyzing their nutrient content. So when it's, something that you're actually going to eat, maybe it matters because those nutrients, we're consuming those nutrients, right? So we do want to maximize it. So I get that. But we're not eating our houseplants. So, how does the foliage look?
Who knows?
It looks good. We're good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it looks good. We're good. That is exactly right. And on that note, Alison, I am going to thank you for today. We have covered everything on our list. And next up, we are going to be looking at pests in episode 3. So thank you very much. We have done episode 1, Alison and I, where we looked at all different kinds of what is semi-hydro, potting configurations, and that kind of thing. If you haven't seen it, it'll be linked. Go and watch that one. It was a really, really good session. And thank you, all of you, for sticking with us for today. Alison, any last words?
No. Just happy growing.
Happy growing, everyone. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. We'll be back with that pest edition very, very soon. Bye.